Local.tv. I'm Eric Jingles. Thank you very much for watching. This afternoon we have Captain Matt Hogan, who's with the Air Canada Pilots Association. Good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Well, certainly our pleasure. But the situation where we're having you on is a little disconcerting, I have to say. In our little pre-interview that we just had, some of the information you were giving me was, I'm sure, a lot of people are unaware of. So perhaps you could just kind of fill us in the concerns for the Air Canada Pilots Association specifically in regards to the amount of hours that pilots are allowed to fly when they shouldn't be, perhaps.
Okay, well, thanks, Eric. First of all, our concern here is in regard to a multi-year regulatory change process to the prescriptive regulations that started in 2010. At that time, we were working with industry and with the regulator on coming to a consensus position to improve flight and duty times as they relate to the Canadian aviation regulations and as they pertain to all aviation operations in Canada, whether that be airlines, commuter airlines, or small aircraft. Since 2010, we've been mired in a multi-year regulatory process. The consensus that came out from that initial consultation has since been degraded significantly without justification from Transport Canada. And now we're in the position of draft regulations that were released by Transport Canada March 25th of this year. And in certain instances, we just don't feel that the draft regulations have gone far enough. While we are heartened that in certain areas they have introduced what they call time of day sensitivity, meaning that you work fewer hours at night than you do during the day. There's been some other improvements in certain areas. There are other areas where we just don't feel it's gone far enough. And in particular, that's in regard to overseas flight at night, departing after 5 p.m. until midnight. And then again, in regards to implementation, we feel that there should be an implementation for all air carriers, whether it be airlines, commuter airlines, or small aircraft, because all pilots suffer the same fatigue. So we feel that implementation time, given the fact that we've been mired in this multi-year regulatory process since 2010, should happen sooner than later.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier. I guess I asked you the question. I said, with truck drivers, for example, are regulated. They're only allowed to drive so many hours a day. And then you said that pilots can fly more than what truck drivers are allowed to drive. And that, to me, seems a little odd.
Yes, that's absolutely correct, Eric. Currently, under the Canadian aviation regulations, Canadian pilots can fly for up to 14 hours as scheduled. And that is any time of the day without any time of day sensitivity. So that meaning if you fly at night, or you fly in the day or the early morning, you are going to be flying for 14 hours. And there's also a provision within those regulations that allow for that to be extended up to 17 hours. So you have what they call an unaugmented crew, so 2 pilots flying or working for up to 17 hours. That just makes no sense. And there's no fatigue scientist out there that would support the current regulations as they exist. And that's why at this time we are trying to work with the regulator to improve those prescriptive regulations going forward. And that being so that all Canadians and all Canadian pilots and Canadian operators operate to an appropriate standard that's compliant with fatigue science.
You mentioned as well that different airlines kind of adhere to their own rules a little bit in terms of the size of the crew, how many pilots they may or may not have on board for what distance. So what you were just saying is that there is no universal standard currently for every airline to follow. So some may be, quite proactive, and others perhaps stretching a little too much.
That is correct, Eric. And if you were to talk to Transport Canada, I'm quite certain they would tell you the same thing. They provide what they call a minimum standard. That is not an industry best practice. So what happens in the industry is, I would call it personally, I would call it competing on safety, where you have different crewing requirements with different air operators. And obviously what happens is you have somewhat of a race to the bottom to the lowest common denominator, that being the minimum standard as set up by Transport Canada. We're just simply asking the regulator to regulate and set those standards so that Canadians and Canadian pilots can be protected by an appropriate level of safety and be compliant with what fatigue science recommends, and widely recommended through successful regulation in the United States, Europe, and Australia.
Well, I suppose with airlines, they're always doing everything they can to, I mean, it is a business, so they want to maximize profits where they can. So lots of talk naturally about the space between your knees and the seat getting smaller and putting more people in there. And I suppose if they're trying to eke out everything they possibly can, salaries and wages is something they would, look at, like you say. So I think it seems like it needs to be regulated because the airlines are bound by profits. So.
Well, and so just to be clear, we're not asking for any more or any less than what science recommends. This is a safety issue.
Well, that's yes.
And just to be very clear, and I agree with you, it's a hyper-competitive industry, and for that reason, so that you don't get this race to the bottom and put into a situation where the standard is not only different, but there's a competition on safety in the sense that there's a different standard for different operators. We believe there should be one standard for all operators, whether it be an airline, commuter operation, or air taxi. And I think Canadians should know and have the confidence when they get on board that they know they're getting an appropriate product that is compliant with widely accepted fatigue science.
What do you think it's going to take for the government then to step in and do something like this?
Well, we're hoping through consultation. We've been in constant contact with the regulator throughout this process. We're hoping the Safer Skies campaign at saferskies.ca, people can go there for more information on how information on this subject matter with regard to fatigue science and fatigue regulation. Mm-hmm. And if they choose to do so, there's also a petition on there. We have a parliamentary petition simply to pressure the government to take a look at some of the areas in the current draft regulations that are deficient before they go in full-time into operation.
Right. Well, certainly this is of a great interest, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about this. This is, I suppose when you get on the plane, you can see the pilot sitting there, you kind of think, oh, I hope he's had a lot of sleep because there's a lot on the line. So good work and keep it up.
Yes, and certainly I can tell you every day for every pilot across this country, the number one priority is safety, and that we take it very seriously, the safety and well-being of the passengers that are entrusted to our care. And again, if they want more information, they can go to saferskies.ca, and we'd love to have them sign our petition and support us. And also on there as well, if you look to pilot stories, there's a video on there that provides the pilot perspective on fatigue.
Very interesting. Okay, well, we'll certainly put that link on our site. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to explain this to us. Matt Hogan, captain he's with the Air Canada Pilots Association, talking to us about pilot safety and the amount of hours that they are legally allowed to fly or should be flying. I'm Eric Jingles for BuzzLocal.tv. Thank you very much for watching.